This married woman became entwined with a vampire, and confused him into staying until sunrise. The sunlight pierces the vampire's body. The exhausted woman collapses onto the bed, holding the corpse. By the time her husband arrives, it is already too late. Lily Rose Depp, daughter of Johnny Depp, joins forces with Nicholas Hoult to bring Nosferatu. One deep night in 19th century Germany, a young and beautiful woman named Ellen seemed to be summoned by some evil force. She awakened from the quiet night and walked out of her house, lying flat on the grass, feeling a surge of pleasure. Before the girl could understand what was happening, a pair of bony hands gripped her throat. Ellen convulsed violently before slowly falling still. In 1838, Ellen was now a married woman. Her husband Thomas was a young lawyer who recently got a new job. He arrived at the Knock Realty Company and was tasked with traveling to Transylvania to negotiate a property deal with Count Alrocks. The Count was elderly and eccentric. He wanted to acquire a property in Whispered for retirement. Due to his frail health, he needed Thomas to make the trip for him. The boss had already laid out the prospects. As long as you secure this client, you will obtain a permanent position at the company. This business trip lasted 6 weeks. Thomas was worried about his newlywed wife. He wanted to ask a friend to take care of her for a while, but Ellen reacted strongly and kept repeating that he couldn't leave because she had been having nightmares lately, thinking that she would lose her beloved husband and marry a god of death dressed in black. The most terrifying part was that even though the dreams were dark, filled with the scent of death, she felt an unprecedented happiness. These strange dreams haunted Ellen. Thomas comforted his wife that this was just an illusion and didn't need to be taken seriously. In the end, he entrusted Ellen to his friend Fred's family for care. They had supported each other since their student days. Thomas felt reassured having his wife stay there. At night, Ellen cut a lock of her hair and tucked it into a necklace. She planned to give it to her husband before he left, and urged him to write to her every day. Thomas mounted his horse and began this fated journey of misfortune. Count Alrocks Castle was located in a remote area, isolated in the Carpathian Mountains. Thomas planned to spend the night at a Romanian inn. There was a large group of gypsies living there. They surrounded Thomas with inexplicable laughter. It seemed they were mocking this outsider. Thomas soon realized that everyone avoided mentioning Count Alrocks Castle. It was a topic that couldn't even be broached. In the inn, an elderly woman advised him not to go to Count Alrocks Castle. After learning the purpose of his trip, she even handed Thomas a crucifix. The atmosphere in the inn was truly eerie. That night, he was awakened by a cacophony of sounds. Thomas walked to the window and looked out. A group of gypsies was holding torches high, surrounding a naked girl on horseback. They moved into the depths of the forest and stopped in front of a vampire's graveyard. The leading gypsy opened a coffin and with a knife killed the vampire inside. Thomas let out a scream and then woke from the nightmare. Could it be that what he saw last night was just a nightmare? But Thomas realized that he was not only wearing his shoes, but that they were covered in mud. He hurriedly changed his clothes and prepared to set off. To his shock, he found that everyone at the inn had vanished. His horse had also disappeared without a trace. Thomas had to continue on foot. He walked until the pitch-black night. The path in the forest was like an entrance to another world, with no end in sight. At this moment, 2 black horses pulling a carriage approached him. In the next second, the carriage door opened. Thomas got in, heading towards the castle at the foot of the mountains. 3 hunting dogs followed behind, barking wildly. The silver moonlight illuminated the road. Thomas felt as if he were in a dream. When he opened his eyes again, he had already arrived at the castle. At the end of the gravel path stood a cloaked man. Thomas gave him a slight bow, but the man turned and walked away. Gathering his courage, he chased after him. The castle doors began to close slowly.
You are late. The midnight hour has passed, and my attendants have all retired.
From what he heard, the cloaked man was Count Alrocks. As they spoke, they arrived inside the castle. It was dimly lit inside. Only the fire in the fireplace illuminated the dining table. Thomas put down his luggage as instructed by the Count, and took out the prepared contract. Alrocks took it and sat at the head of the table to review it. Thomas mentioned the strange things he saw last night. He wanted to know if the local gypsies had any special customs. Alrocks replied that superstition still existed here, and there were some strange rituals. Thomas wanted to ask a few more questions, but he was halted by Count Alrocks.
Speak much of it again!
The Count expressed that he wanted to visit the modern city, where the young people lived. The people there didn't believe in any horror legends, and it must be very interesting. As he spoke, he invited the guests to dine. Thomas was cutting the bread, when he accidentally cut his finger. The smell of blood spread instantly. Alrocks said, "I can help you treat your wound." In the next moment, Thomas found himself teleported to a chair beside the fireplace. The stone statue beside him slowly turned its head. The Count approached him step by step from the darkness. By the time Thomas regained his senses, it was already the next morning. He was lying on the tiles in front of the fireplace. Thomas got up, but Count Alrocks was nowhere to be found. Thomas searched everywhere for someone, only to unexpectedly see in the mirror that something had bitten his chest. The next evening, Alrocks signed his name after reviewing the contract. He used a very obscure ancient language, as Thomas was about to look it over.
Maiden's token, I see. Your bride.
Alrocks took the pendant to admire it. He smelled the scent of lilacs on it. Seizing the opportunity, Thomas asked if he could write to his newlywed wife. The Count changed the subject, and handed Thomas the commission in advance. He had long, sharp nails. Thomas was startled, and quickly signed his name in the agent's section. He expressed his desire to return home quickly, but he soon realized that the Count was unwilling to let him go, and even took away Ellen's pendant. The next morning, Thomas woke up in a fright. He had 2 more blood holes on his chest. Thomas wanted to escape the castle while it was still day, but he discovered that the doors were locked. Thomas searched for an exit everywhere. He unexpectedly found Count Alrocks' coffin where he slept. At this moment, the Count, covered in maggots, was asleep. Thomas finally realized that he was a vampire. He picked up a pickaxe from nearby, planning to kill the Count. Alrocks caught the wooden handle, frightening Thomas into a panicked escape. He locked himself in a room to avoid the barking dogs outside. Ellen, uncontrollably, walked out of the house. Fortunately, Fred noticed her in time, and quickly called for a doctor. The old quack knew nothing at all, and claimed that Ellen's sleeping position was wrong. He suggested she wear a corset to correct her posture while sleeping. Since Ellen had been talking in her sleep, the doctor used ethanol to sedate her. Meanwhile, Count Alrocks unlocked the door, bringing Thomas back to the room, continuing to feed on his chest. When Thomas woke up, he saw the vicious dogs lunging at him. He had to leap out the window. He slipped and fell down. Ellen couldn't get in touch with her husband, and was utterly frantic. Although Fred promised to send someone to look for Thomas, Ellen's hysteria grew worse during this time. By night, she would convulse all over. While searching for Thomas, Fred also learned that the real estate boss had gone mad. He claimed to be the servant of the Grim Reaper, and became extremely vicious. He had just been sent to a mental hospital that morning. The real estate boss's ramblings were identical to Ellen's. Both repeated, "He is coming." Fred had to accept a friend's suggestion to hire an expert to treat Ellen. His name was Franz. He was a well-known doctor in Zurich. However, he was expelled from the university, where he used to work, due to his addiction to alchemy and mystical philosophy. Coincidentally, Franz happened to be in Wisburg recently. As soon as Franz saw Ellen tied to the bed, he ordered them to quickly untie the patient. Then he asked Ellen to describe her feelings. In fact, ever since that sleepwalking incident years ago, she had never been quite normal. Ellen always seemed to predict her Christmas gifts each year, and even the date of her mother's death. Soon, her sleepwalking became more frequent. She was too shy to talk about the desires she felt in her dream. These terrible symptoms only began to lessen when she met Thomas. But after her husband left, Ellen fell back into despair. Franz realized that her illness was likely related to some unnatural force. That night, Ellen's condition flared up again, and it was more severe than before. Franz managed to suppress her with great difficulty. He told Fred that the woman was possessed by an evil spirit, but Fred and the others didn't believe him. After all, they believed in science and reason. Franz didn't provide further explanations. He was eager to return home to study Ellen's condition. He only advised the quack to take care of the patient, and not to use ethanol carelessly again. Thomas fell into the river, and was washed to the shore by the water. A nun discovered him, and took Thomas to the church. With the help of the other nuns, Thomas woke from his nightmare. Although the nuns urged him to stay in the church, to avoid Alrocks' evil power, Thomas was extremely worried about his wife. He realized that Ellen's nightmares had a basis in reality. Alrocks had tricked him here, just to get Ellen. At this moment, the Count had boarded a ship heading to Wisburg. Thomas had no time to wait for his body to recover, and quickly mounted his horse, galloping home. Not long after, the ship that Alrocks was on broke out, with a terrible plague. The crew died in horrific ways. The captain was unaware that once night fell, Alrocks would emerge from his coffin, and go on a killing spree.
His lordship. He has come.
The moment Alrock arrived at the port, Ellen sensed something was wrong. She rushed out the door, only to bump into her husband. Thomas fell off his horse wearily. Ellen hurried over to embrace him. Just then, a group of soldiers knocked on Fred's door. He stepped outside to see that a plague ship was docked at the port. Rats were flooding into Wisburg. The mad real estate boss was paddling a boat to transport Count Alrocks' coffin to his newly purchased mansion.
Joker lives.
I shall stifle out the bridegroom, your lordship.
Alrock planned to spare Thomas's life for now, thinking he might still be of use later. The bells of dawn were about to toll, and as the first rays of sunlight struck Wisburg, it startled the rats that were scurrying about. Franz went to inspect the bodies of the crew members. Apart from some symptoms of the plague, the most perplexing thing was that there wasn't a drop of blood inside these bodies. Moreover, there were 2 puncture wounds above the hearts. What kind of rat could have such large jaws? Franz realized that the demon might have already arrived in Wisburg. At night, Alrock stood by the window stretching his hand toward the sleeping couple, Ellen and Thomas. Thomas felt a sudden suffocation in his chest. He roughly pushed his wife away from him. Ellen had no idea what was happening, and could only squeeze in with her friend Anna, because Fred was out on business tonight, and might not return until tomorrow morning. In fact, Fred was arguing with Franz about the origins of this plague. Franz had verified through research that their adversary was the carrier of the undead plague, the vampire Nosferatu. At this moment, Alrock approached Ellen.
I felt you crawling like a serpent in my body.
It is not me. It is your nature.
No, I love Thomas.
What did this dialogue really mean? It suggested that those who are more easily driven by primal desires are more likely to be entangled by demons. It wasn't that Alrock forcibly possessed Ellen, but rather that Ellen's hidden desires awoke the beast that had been asleep for centuries. Alrock represented Ellen's ID, embodying her most primal impulses. Thomas represented her superego, the good husband who adhered to social norms. Do you remember the contract drafted by the Count in ancient language? At that time, Thomas didn't understand and signed his name. He offered a bag of gold coins to betroth his wife to the Count. Alrock informed Ellen of this, saying that they had already signed a contract. However, it must be with Ellen's willing consent to abandon her existing marriage. Alrock only gave her 3 nights to consider. If Ellen didn't provide a satisfactory answer, Thomas would die at his hands, and the world would suffer from the plague. Desperate, Ellen woke from her nightmare. She instinctively looked beside her, and found Anna lying on the floor, being gnawed by several filthy rats. The plague was spreading at an astonishing rate. The hospitals in Wisburg quickly became overwhelmed. The doctors could only petition the mayor for a lockdown to prevent the virus from spreading and infecting more people. Anna's condition worsened. Ellen told Fred that it was the devil at work. You must bring Franz to help, but he insisted on sticking to science. Fred grew tired of Ellen's conspiracy theories and urged her to quickly take Thomas away from his house. Franz learned that the real estate boss had bitten 2 guards to escape the hospital, so he went with others to search his office. They indeed found a magical circle on the floor and a dark grimoire. It was written, "A beautiful woman offers her love to the beast. Only by her willing sacrifice can the curse be broken and save the people from the plague of Nosferatu."
She is the way.
Franz immediately went to Fred's house to ask to speak with Ellen. He learned that Fred had driven her away. Franz was about to scold him when Fred erupted in anger. "Can't you see the rampant plague? A genuine plague is truly killing people. So stop talking about demons. Get out of my house." At the same time, Thomas had just regained consciousness and insisted on leading his wife to escape Wisburg. But Ellen knew that avoiding was useless. She could only confess to Thomas, "It was my desires that summoned the devil. We were once lovers, but now he knows we are married, so he has come back to cause destruction." Thomas was at a loss as to what to do. Suddenly, Ellen's expression changed dramatically and accused her husband of being weak for selling her out for a bag of gold. The more Ellen spoke, the more emotional she became, until she suddenly shrieked and collapsed to the ground, her face contorted as if possessed by a spirit. Seeing this, Thomas wanted to find Franz, but Ellen crawled over and embraced him tightly.
You could never please me as he could.
Thomas held the frenzied Ellen until she slowly regained her senses. Meanwhile, Alrock's claws were once again reaching for Fred's family. That night, Anna heard the screams of her 2 daughters, but couldn't wake her husband. She ran alone to the guest room, only to find her 2 poor children had been drained. When Fred finally woke up, he had already lost all his family. Thomas approached his heartbroken friend, and opened his shirt to reveal his chest wound. He told him that what Franz said was true. I was also bitten by that devil. Thanks to the nun's sincere prayers, I didn't develop any symptoms of the plague. Franz had finished reading the entire grimoire last night, and believed that to eliminate Alrock, they had to ensure he couldn't return to his coffin. Thomas mentioned that Alrock had purchased Greenwood Manor, so his coffin must be there. If we destroy it, and pierce Alrock's heart with an iron stake, we can save Whispered from the plague's poison. Thomas was determined to kill Count Alrock. However, he didn't know that this was merely Franz's scheme. A regular iron stake would likely be insufficient to harm a vampire. Franz's true plan was to have Ellen eliminate Alrock.
I will keep your husband at bay tonight. Go now, go home. Attend him, that he is sturdy for this false hunt.
In the afternoon, Thomas gathered everyone together, only to find that Fred was missing at a critical moment. Fortunately, there was still some time before sunset, so Thomas decided to search for Fred first. Unfortunately, when they arrived at the cemetery, Fred had already died beside his wife and children. They decided to burn the infected bodies. The death of his friend deeply affected Thomas. He couldn't wait for dawn, and took advantage of the night to head to Greenwood Manor. This part was indeed perplexing. Did they really have to wait until midnight to seek their doom? Thomas and his group burst into the manor, stepping over heaps of rats on the ground, until they reached Alrock's coffin. Thomas gripped the iron stake and aimed it at the figure inside, but the coffin contained not Alrock, but the real estate boss. Thomas realized that Alrock must have gone to find his wife tonight. Franz wanted to detain Thomas to prevent him from ruining his plan, but Thomas, anxious to protect his wife, turned to leave. Franz had to stay behind and set the entire manor ablaze with a torch. Tonight was the predetermined 3rd night. Ellen dressed up and prepared to summon Alrock. Her plan was quite simple. She pretended to agree to Alrock's demands, and used herself as bait to lure him into staying the night. She intended for Alrock to suck her blood from her heart. Vampires find it hard to resist sweet temptation, and lingered until dawn, only to realize the danger then. The sunlight quickly penetrated Alrock's decaying flesh, and Ellen, having lost too much blood, was completely drained. She slept soundly on the bed holding Alrock's bones. Thomas arrived too late, and his beautiful wife had already passed away. The story finally came to an end here. Although it was still the tale of Dracula, this film had a more gothic flavor than its predecessors. It also didn't romanticize the love of vampires. Instead, it used this shocking and twisted romance to depict how Ellen struggled between her primal desires and dogmatic norms. Director Agnes's debut film, The Witch, also called for women to embrace their most primal desires. This film continued his perfect audiovisual style, and has already grossed over 100 million globally. Its IMDb rating has stabilized at 7.7. It can be said that both its reputation and box office are quite good. In summary, those who enjoy Agnes's style will likely love this film. If you enjoy my channel, please click to subscribe.